This is TLV1.
The Tel Aviv Review with Gilad Halpern.
Hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review, a program dedicated to the word, to the thought and to debate. I'm your host, Gilad Halpern, and every week I'll be engaging in close encounters of the intellectual kind with writers and scholars, or just people of ideas of all types and vocations who have done something to make our lives a tad more interesting. My guest today is a sociologist at the University of Manchester in the UK who's researching gay parenthood and surrogacy in Israel. She's joining me now in the studio. Adi Moreno, welcome to the Tel Aviv Review.
Thank you, Gilad.
So procreation is a central theme in Israeli culture as part of the demographic struggle, as it were, for a Jewish majority in the country. And I'd like to ask you, how did the emergence of gay parenthood over the last decade or two fit into this mold?
Yeah, well, actually, one of the things that I asked myself when I started researching gay reproduction was, one, why does it happen so quickly? How come so many people are now engaged in making babies, basically? And secondly, why didn't it happen before? Because procreation, was such a big theme in Israel since Israel's inception. And in the world, gay people, lesbians, homosexuals started having babies in organized manner in the 80s and 90s. So
because the technology was already available then?
Well, they could use it. They could do it before the technology because the basic technology is just what they call a turkey baster. They just take the man's sperm and inject it into the women's vagina without having intercourse. And people were doing it all over the world, but not in Israel, surprisingly, or at least not in large numbers.
Okay. So it's not a question of just the technology that made it possible, so therefore there was like a proliferation of unmarried or single-sex couples having babies. It was more than that. It was a cultural thing.
Yes, exactly. And that's the interesting thing. So people were having babies all the time, of course. People with LGBT orientation were always having children. But I think until the 90s, they were mainly getting married in order to do that or finding some kind of other arrangements. But since the 90s, lesbian women in Israel could receive sperm for free or state-funded. So you saw the lesbian baby boom starting in 95, 96. Now gay men joined in 10 years later when surrogacy was an option. And surrogacy is such a good option in Israel because it offers you two things that are very important in the Israeli society. One is reproduction, but the other is having a respectable family, a respectable couple-based monogamy with children.
So it was basically the struggle for recognition as a normative family that led them to do it?
Well, I think there is an essence of wanting to have children, which is always the basis of wanting to reproduce. And you can say that part of the reason to want to have children is that you want to be respectable, and part of it is because everybody else in Israel wants to have children.
So why didn't it happen before? I mean, people in Israel always wanted to have children.
But before, in order to have children, you needed to cross other social barriers. Like you needed to have co-parenting, so to be like a divorced couple, or maybe to kind of get married.
Social or legal barriers? Or
social, just social. There were also legal barriers because you couldn't adopt or because your partner couldn't be recognized as a parent, which is still the case if you do co-parenting or if you have a mother, legally recognized mother, then you can't have two fathers. But there is also the social cognitive barrier of building a new kind of family. And with surrogacy, you have a kind of family that in a way imitates or replicates what we call the normal family or the normative family, which is a couple-based couple who raise their children, but this couple is two men instead of a man and a woman.
And what brought about this being more socially acceptable than before? I mean, it's just a process of opening up of the society, as it, perhaps happened in other places before. It was just, a chronological accident, as it were.
Well, it might be a bit of an accident. It's the technological and mainly the legal possibility, which started appearing in 2005. It was the market opening up in a way with having more agencies that actually push this forward for profit. And it's also a kind of a discursive explosion because people were starting to talk about it, even in feminist critical sections of society, but it was more known. And the more that people knew about it, the more they were opening up to the possibility of using it as a way to become fathers. And an interesting example is the Google Baby documentary. It's a very critical documentary. It's known worldwide for its critical stance on surrogacy, but it actually marketed surrogacy in Israel.
What was it about? Tell us a bit about it.
It's about Doron Mamet, who is one of the leading surrogacy agents in Israel. He's selling surrogacy usually in India and now in other places in the world.
Because it was banned in India, right?
Yeah. And you see how Indian surrogates are treated, the way that they live in a hostel, they have to leave their homes, they have to sleep during the whole pregnancy, they stay in this place and they can't leave the place, they can't live with their family. They're very restricted in their everyday movements, in what they eat, what they do, the kind of medicine they get. So there's a lot of problematics around it, around their autonomy, their possibility of really choosing this trade.
And yet you're saying it raised awareness
Yes,
of the prospects of surrogacy that actually led to a boom.
Yeah, so I heard stories about, somebody told me that his mother saw this documentary and then she called him and said, I saw Google Baby. You could now go to this agent and you could purchase surrogacy in India. It's really cheap and it's available. So everybody saw in it different things.
But it also comes from the people themselves, doesn't it? I mean, the fact that people now, gay men, gay couples, are more predisposed today to have babies. They want babies more than they did 10 or 20 years ago.
I don't know. That's something I couldn't answer because you need to have comparative research for that. But I spoke with people who were in their 50s. They say they always wanted to have children. They actually tried in different ways before, but in a way they couldn't. I mean, there were more barriers maybe.
So it was basically frowned upon that gay single men, single man, whether gay or not, would have a so-called illegitimate child outside of wedlock.
Yeah.
So that was the thing, really.
And also the technical possibility, because before, if you tried to become a father, you would find a woman to do it with, and then you had to negotiate all this, doing the IVF treatments together, and a lot of these attempts failed, either because biology, the body just didn't work out, because usually IVF fails, or sometimes the whole process of finding common grounds to raise a child together just didn't work for these particular people.
So now having babies has become some sort of commodity.
Exactly.
To come back to your field as a critical sociologist, if you look at it this way, I mean, what they do is it's a service. They pay money and get something in return. Yeah,
it's a market. It's a market for reproduction. You could call it a market for babies. But I'm also a bit wary about using these words because they carry a lot of weight, of critical weight, which some of it is very much justified and some of it isn't. When I tell my interviewees that they bought the child, they are very, very upset about that. And on the other hand, they themselves mention the cost. They would have no problem saying, my child cost $250,000 very proudly.
Yeah, sure.
But it's not, they didn't buy it.
Yeah, I went to great lengths to have that baby. Yeah.
Exactly, and it's a very cherished baby. There is a very good sociological book called Pricing the Priceless Child by Viviana Zelizer. And that's exactly that the more we invest money in children, the more we want to call them as priceless, even though actually baby markets are only advancing around the world.
And what does it do to the feminist cause, the fact that there are so many LGBT people and couples who were once fellow travelers to the cause of perhaps undermining or questioning the old structures of the family, etc. And now they're struggling to be as heteronormative as possible.
Yeah, that's an interesting question because on one hand, I think it's a very good possibility that everybody who wants to raise whatever kind of family they want to can do whatever they want. I mean, broadening society's options is definitely a good thing. But on the other hand, I believe it creates more pressure to adapt yourself to society's requirements, like finding a partner and having children. And as a lesbian, I feel this oppression myself. Like 10 years ago, nobody would expect me to have children. I never wanted to have children. Now I'm expected to do so because society now expects you to have children no matter what's your sexual orientation. So, of course, it's a difference. The other thing which is very problematic with surrogacy is that in Israel it has become the main route to become a father. Like if you're gay, you're expected to use surrogacy.
Are there any? Oh, as opposed to adoption?
There is no option of adoption in Israel.
So what are the other routes?
Well, one thing is that instead of putting so much effort for politically fighting for surrogacy, you could fight for adoption, or you could fight for extending family in ways that are impossible now, like having more than 2 parents for a child, which is very important. And it's also important not just for gay people, it's important for divorced parents, and it's important for a lot of varieties of families who live in the world today that have actually more than 2 parents for a child, but it's not acknowledged.
But this pressure, this atmospheric pressure, if you like, I'm assuming that your interviewees don't admit to it. They just convince themselves maybe that they want to have children because that's what they want. It's not as if, based on some pressure from the outside, parents, etc., that they change their mind and say, okay, I don't know, 10 years ago I didn't want a baby and today it looks like a much better idea.
Pressure doesn't operate from the outside, generally speaking. It operates from us. We want to be like everybody else. We desire that. That's what Foucault said, that pressure in today's world doesn't operate in a coercive manner. It operates through your very personal, private desires. So part of it is that when you can be like everybody else, a lot of people would desire that. And on the other thing is that some people think, well, everybody around me are having that. I don't necessarily feel that pull to be a father, but I'm afraid that if I don't do that now, I might lose something that I can't catch up later in life, and this fear of missing out on something so big and so meaningful in people's lives around me is something that also pulls people into fatherhood.
Are there any significant differences between lesbian couples and homosexual couples?
Well, first of all, it's much easier and much cheaper for lesbian couples, because we don't need surrogacy. We don't actually pay anybody else to reproduce for us. We just buy the sperm.
No, but in the terms of discourse.
Yeah, but it does create significant change because the process, in a way, is simpler. And I think also in lesbian couples, but I haven't researched lesbian couples. I just read research about them. But I think that in Israel there is less discussion about the genetics. It's less meaningful. Whose genetic child is it?
Oh, I see.
Or who carried the pregnancy? Because lesbians usually talk about the actual child rearing, the actual care. Like women usually speak about parenthood in terms of care, and men would speak of parenthood in terms of genetic links.
Right.
So you see it also in my research.
Interesting.
So you would see I interviewed people who their children is not theirs genetically. So they would say something like, it's my child because I was part of the surrogacy process. I helped organize it. I signed the contract. I initiated it with my partner, and it happened that it's his sperm. I don't think a woman would speak like that. She would say, I nurtured this baby since it was born. So it's a different aspect of parenting. I don't think there is any different aspect in the parenting itself, maybe just in the way speaking of it.
Is there any data from the world that allows us to take some comparative perspective on this? Is Israel really a hotbed of surrogacy in this sense? Not, because of the culture that we talked about in the beginning of this conversation?
Yes, in a way it is. I mean, there is no accurate numbers, but when you see the numbers we have inside Israel of how many people engage with surrogacy, and I compared it with the researchers from Denmark, which is a state in a similar size, where I think at least twice as much cases, maybe even much more. And I know that agencies in the US, in the UK, in India, they see the Israeli customers as an important market, and we are such a tiny state. So you see there is a big difference between our size and our participation in the market. Yeah,
well, it's a startup nation also in this sense.
Yeah.
Maybe it's got to do with the fact that also childbirth, the rate is higher in Israel than these countries altogether, even among heterosexual.
Yes, and the number of
couples.
cycles of IVF, of in vitro fertilization, is 6 times as much as the OECD average.
That's amazing.
Yes, so,
Wow. And also, you said earlier that, the availability of surrogacy deflects some of the energy that could have been focused on, changing the legal situation for gay people in Israel, which is, compared to other Western countries, is derisory in terms of, having really the most basic rights as couples, etc. Do you think that really it's a lost cause now, or do you see like little buds of change in this direction too?
I don't think it's a lost cause, but I think it's very problematic that a certain elite of the gay population in Israel is invested in this particular project, because surrogacy will never be what you could say reproduction for the masses. It's very expensive, and it's very much dependent on your individual capabilities in terms of money, but also in terms of education, being able to sign very complicated contracts in English, going to other places around the world. It's not something that should be a choice for everybody, even if it was free of all the ethical considerations, which is, it's not free. We haven't even started talking about that, but there are a lot of problematics in surrogacy projects. So I think an alternative mode of making families should emerge sometime.
But that is probably because, having a single-sex family is still an upper-middle-class practice.
I don't think that.
No?
I don't think it's the case. It's just these are the cases that we know. You don't know how many divorced gay fathers actually exist in Israel. Gay fathers, lesbian mothers, they are just erased from the discourse. But I know from other countries that they are actually the majority of LGBT parents. The people who were heterosexually married, had children and got divorced. But they are not even considered part of the LGBT parenting community. And that's a really problematic issue, because their issues are very similar to people who create families themselves, to co-parenting families, because they have different living arrangements. They have more than 2 parents, and they create alternative families even without intending to be alternative.
Well, so there's still a prospect for some change to emerge from the grassroots level, or bottom-up kind of thing.
Yeah.
All right. Well, this is all very interesting, Adi Moreno. I thank you very much for coming in today and talking to us about gay parenthood and surrogacy in Israel. There's a lot more to be done and researched and read about this. I encourage our readers to look up some of the things that you've written and familiarize themselves with this fascinating work. Adi Moreno, thank you very much.
Thank you.
That brings us to the end of our show today. Thank you very much for listening. Also, big thanks to Alex Benish, the technical producer of this show. I'm Gilad Halpern, signing off here in Tel Aviv. Do join us again next week for another edition of the Tel Aviv Review. And until then, goodbye.
חוזר הניגון שזנחת לשווא, והדרך עודנה נפקחת לאורך, וענן בשמיו ואילן בגשמיו מצפים עוד לך עובר אורח, והרוח תקום בטיסת נדנדות, יעברו הברקים מעליך, וכבשה והילד תהיינה עדות שליטפת אותן והוספת ללכת. ידיך ריקות ועירך רחוקה, ולא פעם סגדת אפיים לחושה ירוקה ואישה בצחוקה וצמרת גשומת עפעפיים. חוזר הניגון שזנחת לשווא, והדרך עודנה נפקחת לאורך, וענן בשמיו ואילן בגשמיו מצפים עוד לך עובר